So, David.
Yes, Michelle.
Look, now, Jeremy was such a good chat.
Yes, we've had him in a box with a mask over his head.
I love that.
Yep.
Not so much for him, but
all diplomats
but for
are
us.
used to that. That's how they train.
Yes. So I thought, we'd put him on pause and then we'd unpause him and we'd discuss a little bit more about diplomats.
Well, there was that big diplomatic review that we never got around to last week. Let's get onto it now.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay.
You're listening to I Spied, the government review of Australian intelligence.
2, 3, 4. Na 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 na.
It's not that kind of review.
Oh, crap.
Hello and welcome to I Spy. My name is Michelle Stevenson. I'm here with David Callan and we've had Jeremy.
Sitting in his office for a week.
Yeah, we put him on pause and we did send some food though. I think he's okay.
Yeah, well, tin of spaghetti and a bit of toast.
So Jeremy Dicker is a former diplomat and we kind of touched a little bit on the G7, the Quad and kind of Biden cancelling and all of that. But what we really want to talk about is, I want to talk about your time in the United States and also there was a review, a diplomatic review.
They did. That's Revue, REVIEW, not REVUE, which you generally get at an ASEAN meeting where everyone gets up and does karaoke. Don't all the foreign ministers have to do karaoke? There's a very famous one of Alexander Downer doing karaoke, and it was really bad.
Was that when he was in his fishnets?
No. That was actually the funny thing about the fishnet stockings. He must really hate that media advisor because he was wearing the fishnet stocking because he was in Adelaide. That's his electorate. Well,
that doesn't explain why he was wearing the fishnet stockings.
Rocky Horror was opening in Adelaide and they were getting famous people in Adelaide to do it, and he was the only one that it stuck to. No one else cared about it. I know,
but
else.
I also just think he wanted to.
But also, there's not that many famous people in Adelaide, really. Except our good friend Andrew P. Street. Hope everything's going well. Andy.
Yes. So, Jeremy, briefly give us an overview of your time working in the United States in the capacity that you did.
Yeah, that was my third and final posting, and
you were like, I'm out now.
No, I mean, I had a dream run at DFAT. I felt lucky to ever get a job there, and felt lucky every step of the way I was there. So yeah, it was really just reaching a certain age, got little kids, and another opportunity came up I was excited about. But I mean, the US posting in particular, I arrived just shortly after Trump had taken office, so early 2017. And I mean, it was a heck of a time to be in the US. I think, Trump's election had caught a lot of people by surprise, but not everyone by surprise. I think one person that felt like it was a real possibility and who was preparing for that possibility was Australia's then ambassador at the time, Joe Hockey.
Yeah.
Wow. Recognises like.
I don't know what.
Sorry,
no comment is fine. You're allowed to say no comment. We accept it.
So Joe was the ambassador at the time, and he had picked it, and I think that was to Australia's advantage because I think many other countries were just buying what everyone was assuming, which was that Clinton was going to win. So that meant we were in a pretty good position when Trump did win, or he had connections in with his team and whatnot. But I think foreign services all around the world after Trump won
were scrambling.
And it wasn't just Trump. Like Brexit happened around the same time as well.
Yeah,
there was stuff happening all around the world that just felt like things were less predictable. Things were moving more quickly, and I think a lot of foreign services, a lot of diplomatic services, including our own, probably felt like things needed to change to try and stay ahead of all this. So I mean, for us in the US, Joe Hockey as ambassador, and he was big on getting out of DC, getting out of the main coastal capital cities and just crossing the country, crisscrossing the country and getting to know people, getting to know folks and understand what was happening, what were the forces that were driving this place, this most powerful nation in the world. And so that impacted me as well. And then I was working out of the Australian consulate in Los Angeles, which is an amazing city. There are far worse places you could serve your country than in Los Angeles, California.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe New York, but I also thought, I reckon you were in Los Angeles. It just felt right.
That's exactly where I was. And so, I got out and about and went not only across California, but into neighboring states as well, which we sort of covered from LA. one of the neighboring states was Nevada, home to Las Vegas. And so I went to Vegas a couple of times for work purposes. One of those times I went to observe a Trump rally. And that's not unusual. Like, foreign diplomats are always going to political events because we're invited to try and understand that, the positions of different candidates and what it might mean for relations with that country. But still, when you say I went to a Trump rally in Vegas, that is, not what you expect to do in your job, but it's something I did do. And it was a pretty remarkable experience.
But I think it's important, and like, even when we talk about the climate of media and stuff like that, I think it's important, particularly with media, that people, interact or consume media that they don't agree with. So I think that's really important. But in the same way that I think it's important that instead of having kind of a tunnel view of something, you need to go and experience it, and you need to get kind of like the feels from the floor. And I think that was one of Joe Hockey's strengths, his likability and his ability to kind of like be a man of the people as well in a certain regard. That kind of Australianism came out in him, which I think posts like that probably were lacking.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is when you're working at a place like DFAT, you have to go beyond the politics. You have to, like, everywhere I went, I had to shake hands with people that I probably would not have wanted to shake hands with, if it wasn't my job. But that's your job. You're there representing your country, and it's an honor to do so. And that means sometimes you got to do things that are in the national interest. You got to go places in the national interest. And I think really it means going beyond the politics as much as you possibly can and trying to understand what's driving it. Why are people voting for this guy? Why are people voting against this guy? And if you don't understand that, it's to the detriment of you and your work and the country. So, I as a byproduct, though, again, I think you can't do 14 years in the Foreign Service having these kinds of experiences and not have it shape you as a person, as a citizen, as a voter. And I'm sure it has me. I think, I sort of mentioned in last week's episode about seeing the humanity on the other side. And I just, even when there's a political movement that we find, or we might find objectionable, I still think it's incumbent on all of us, beneficial to all of us, to at least try and understand it.
Yes.
So have some empathy, not sympathy, empathy for why folks might want to vote some way. And even when you're working for DFAT or any foreign service, you've got to step it up a level and go beyond politics, the geopolitics. And we talk about having geostrategic empathy. Like, why is this country acting the way it is? Why is this world leader so paranoid or so obsessed with this, that, and the other? We're paid to think that way and go beyond the immediate headlines and think really clearly. And that sometimes means, having awkward conversations and go to kind of weird places.
Sounds very, very similar to my experience in the intelligence world, in that you could have a political opinion. That doesn't mean you can't let that influence what you're doing. You've got to remove your confirmation bias, so you can actually function as an analyst or as an field operative. You can't do that without going, right, my politics doesn't count. I mean, I found it very interesting when I left and people found out. They were like, oh, you must be very conservative. Michelle, am I conservative?
No.
She thinks I'm bolshy, and I'm actually not.
He's so bolshy.
You know what? The workers are going to kill you for that.
No, but, it's very interesting, and that's also part of the reason why, the writing wasn't immediately on the wall about Trump winning, because a lot of people were afraid. The political climate was as such that they were afraid to say that they support him, because they were afraid to be shouted down or, pigeonholed as well, because we've kind of lost that ability to have nuance and debate around kind of these big, real issues as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, the guy himself didn't exactly lend himself to nuance or debate.
No.
Even when he became president, he didn't really lend himself to credibility whatsoever. That's what's really fascinating about it.
Yes.
And he's still managing to survive now.
So let's crack into, there was recently a review about Australia's diplomatic network, and kind of what came out of it were some pretty interesting things. And last ep, you kind of said something around how the climate has changed in terms of diplomats and what is needed. And that was one of the things that came out of the review, that the climate has in fact changed, and big changes need to happen for it to kind of move forward, and that there's some serious gaps. What do you think did you read, I'm assuming you read the review, but what did you think of a lot of the points that were made in there, and would you agree with a lot of that?
Yeah, I mean, I read media reports about the review, but I didn't know if the review itself has been made public.
I've been looking for it, and it's all abstract or extract. It's not the full review.
If anyone's going to find the full review and actually sit down and read it, it's this guy right here.
Hey,
he has nothing else to do with his life. Yeah. So yes, we are going off reports of what is in the review.
Yeah, and I mean, I was still at DFAT when the head of DFAT Jams launched it. And in fact, there were a couple of broadly similar reviews into DFAT through my 14 years there. So, I mean, part of me feels like, here we go again.
Yeah.
Another review that might achieve nothing. I really hope that's not the case. I think, a new head of DFAT, a relatively new government, that is an opportunity to try and make some changes that I think DFAT probably needs. But the reality is, when you work for DFAT, you get to deal with diplomats from all around the world. In my case, not only did I get to deal with diplomats from all around the world, I actually did a posting where I worked inside another country's foreign service. I was in the Peruvian.
Oh, so you
foreign
seconded
ministry.
across?
Yeah, which is a really unusual experience, but one I'll never forget. I mean, it's a total career highlight for me to do that. But I mean, one of the things from that experience, which just kind of gelled with all the conversations I've had with foreign diplomats all around the world, every foreign service is kind of struggling in some pretty similar ways. I think the concept of a foreign service, of a diplomatic service, it was born hundreds of years ago when we never really knew what was happening on the other side of the world, because it would take weeks or months to get a message from one corner to the other. And so, we had to have these networks of trusted representatives that could act on our behalf and keep us posted on what was going on. But, a lot of that original raison d'etre for having a foreign service has sort of been eroded by the advent of instantaneous global communication, right? And you no longer necessarily need to rely on your diplomats in a foreign country to know what's going on there, because, there's very likely to be some amazing foreign correspondent from, the Financial Times or one of your colleagues, Michelle, or whoever, who will be like all across that issue and will have already published a news story about it before you even hit send on your cable back to camera.
Yeah.
That's not to say that therefore cables, which is like a fancy term for reports that we use in DFAT and other foreign ministry, it's not to say that they are obsolete. It's just more to say that there has had to be a pretty serious rethink about what role they play, the way they disseminate information around diplomatic network. But yeah, so I think every foreign ministry is kind of wrestling with it. I think every foreign ministry that I've dealt with complains that there's just such an aversion to risk, that there's so much bureaucracy. It can just be painful to just get the most menial thing done, to get approval to send the most mundane email or tweet or whatever. It can really be painful. I think part of that is inevitable, because you're dealing with matters, not all the time. Sometimes you're dealing with things that matter and the stakes are high. And so you need a lot of eyes on something before you hit send on it. You need to make sure that decision is bulletproof before you action it. And so I think it's always healthy to have a little bit of that slow bureaucratic inertia around the process of foreign policy. But I suspect a lot of my former colleagues and diplomats all around the world will probably agree that it goes too far a lot of the time.
Once the inertia becomes morass, then you're in trouble.
Well said, David. It can be it can be pretty painful when you find yourself in that morass, and it can be tough on morale. It can be tough on effectiveness. And I think over the years, different governments in Australia have cut DFAT's budget. It's seen its influence eroded in Canberra. That's led to arguably a bit of impotence abroad in terms of what we can do and where we can shape events.
How much of that reduction of influence has been the rise of PM&C. Prime Minister and Cabinet has now become sort of like the premier, which makes sense in a way, department and policy influencer. But how much of that has also been the use of back channels, say, instead of going through foreign affairs, they're going through something like a business associate, that like a business contact that is associated with their party or associated with the government in some sort of way. It's just for me, I find it fascinating. The standout thing for me was we have diplomatic missions that should have a certain number of should have 3 staff in it, and there's only 1. And how much of that is an insult to the host country that you can't even care to have enough people in your mission?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on one of the recommendations from the review there, David, which was we shouldn't have any diplomatic missions with less than 3 people.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've never been in a mission with just 1 person, but I've seen missions where there's 3, and even that is stretched pretty thin. Even in LA where we're a pretty small team, but there were multiple times where I had a meeting or some event I had to go to and would have to pull out at the last minute because there's been some random thing happen in the office.
You did a Biden. We're calling that, if you pull out of anything from now on, it's called doing a Biden. I'm making that a thing.
Okay.
So,
I mean, I could say something right now. I'm just going to stop.
Poor old Biden. And those situations, if you just had 1 more person, it would massively increase your ability to get stuff done.
Bottom line, you've got someone there to answer the phone.
Yeah, or handle some consular client who's having a tough time and it escalates or out in the foyer or whatever. Just so many unpredictable things happen every day. And being able to juggle all that, I think helps my ex-colleagues prove and deliver on their potential to the government. In turn, probably makes for a more compelling argument as to why there should be more resources allocated to our foreign policy in the first place.
Yeah, and according to the report, it does say that in terms of our diplomatic presence, Australia ranked 19th among the G20 nations and 20th out of 38 in the OECD. So we're not sitting pretty high, are we?
No, we're not top of the list. That's not a good thing, I don't think.
So what would be the perception then if you're looking from another country, because the network is kind of stretched to the point of ineffectiveness in some areas that the report found, and we're not ranked too high. Are we treated seriously? Are we taken seriously?
Yeah, I mean, let me share an example with you. A lot of our missions around the world, they're not just accredited to the one host country, but to a bunch of countries around the region.
In that region,
that's the office we've got in the region, right? And so, a lot of the time, from the perspective of an Australian taxpayer, you can see why that would make sense. You don't have a lot going on in that corner of the world, and so one office should be able to just cover the whole kind of region and we move on with it. But sometimes that changes. And I remember earlier in my career, I saw an example of that where the former Labor government had been voted in. So Kevin 07 had happened, and one of the things that then Prime Minister Rudd did was launch this bid for Australia to get elected to the UN Security Council.
Yeah.
It was going to be a massive uphill push because the 2 other competitors that were against, Lithuania and Finland and Luxembourg, I can't remember.
I think it was Lithuania. No, I think it was Finland and Lithuania. Yes, I think that's right.
And one of my colleagues will be tisting me. I've forgotten this.
Someone will tisk me, but that's just my life.
I think it might have been Luxembourg. Anyway, so they had announced their candidacy 10 years earlier, right? So imagine 10 years after your other 2 competitors already, got their starting line. And so all of a sudden, these countries that maybe weren't front and center for us, and we didn't even have a network representation in their capitals, all of a sudden we needed those countries to vote for us, because in these situations, every single country at the UN General Assembly, 190 something countries, each one of their votes matters the same, whether you're a tiny island in the Pacific or one of the giants. And so I kind of saw that up close where I was posted to Mexico City, and we were accredited to, I think, 9 countries, right? Like Cuba, Dominican Republic, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. For me as a young diplomat, it made for a pretty steep learning curve, a pretty incredible experience crisscrossing all these countries that I'd only seen on a map.
Yeah.
Working with all my colleagues really hard to try and build some networks there, and presence there, and try and win those votes. And in the end, amazingly, and I think to the then Labor government's credit and to all my former colleagues at DFAT's credit, we ended up winning that election in the first round in September 2012. It was a huge coup. But I think those sort of situations, my sense of how crazy the world's getting, how fast things are developing, how volatile things are getting, we're going to find ourselves more and more in situations where we do have things at stake in seemingly far-flung corners of the world.
Yes.
And we're going to need to pick up the phone more and more to folks all around the world, and we're going to need to have those pre-existing relationships and that nuance and that context to understand who you call in the first place. It's bloody hard to do that when you're juggling 9 different countries for a small team in one capital city in the region. It just feels like spinning plates. And also, it is hard for a country to take you seriously when you don't even have a representative in their capital city. I mean, we can't have a embassy at every single country. I'm not saying that. But, Michelle, you mentioned we're number 19 out of the G20 and number 20-something out of the OECD. I mean, there's a lot of room for us to expand our footprint and add depth to it, right? Get rid of these one-person posts and really try and get something done.
And I do think it's also imperative that we're seen to be taking this stuff seriously. I think for a lot of the time, Australia it is a little laid back in the way we're perceived, and we do rely a little more on, our alliances as well, as opposed to kind of forging our own path and saying we are here.
Well, and I think we could do. I mean, we felt like we could do that, Michelle, and I think most Western powers felt like we could get away with that because the Cold War had over. The free world had won, and there was this one massive superpower that was ruling the seas and enforcing this peace and this prosperity around the world. And I think history is starting to show now that was a bubble, a brief unipolar moment. The foreign policy circles. And that's the bubble that I've grown up in. I mean, I don't really remember much before the Cold War fell. And I think I and a lot of Australians my age, a lot of folks around my age, will have got the wrong impression that state of being was inevitable, that it was natural, that's where the world defaults to this prosperity and stability of the world just kind of humming along. But we're seeing that really change. And I think we are coming to regret some of the decisions on both sides of government in Australia that said we don't really need to worry about having a foreign service, so we'll just gut it, sell embassies and not worry about it. I think we're learning that. We saw that at Solomon Islands last year when they did that security pact with China. But I think there may well be some more surprises in store. Who the heck knows? But I think we'll see it was a mistake maybe to shrug off some of those responsibilities.
Now, on the volatility, and this is let's let the rubber hit the road here. We have seen an uptick in our intelligence capability overseas, I believe. But as a diplomat, how often did you sort of encounter not so much the Australian intelligence services and their activity on foreign shores, but how often did you feel that you were under the scrutiny of the domestic intelligence service in the areas you were in?
Well, yeah, that's I'm still kind of fresh out of DFAT. In fact, this is my first public engagement really since stepping out.
Yep.
And so I guess I'm still thinking through how to handle these sorts of questions in the public domain. I mean,
I don't want any details, none of that. We'll just have a drink later on and we'll talk about that. No. Essentially, did you as a diplomat feel that there were times where you felt you were under the scrutiny of a foreign intelligence service?
Oh, yeah. There were times when I knew I was.
Wow.
And there were times when I was warned about situation X happening.
Yep.
And so I was like, okay, I'll prepare myself for situation X. And then that exact thing happens because the local intelligence service just has a script that they just adhere to blindly. So absolutely. And, we don't just kind of get given a passport and a plane ticket and sent off into the arse end of the world and say, good luck. I mean, you get a lot of training in this sort of stuff, and you get security clearances to make sure that,
you can handle, you are cleared to read what you need to read and do. Yeah.
Exactly. So I honestly, that's possibly one of the things I'll miss the most about leading DFAT, like that whole world of
being able to read that shit. Yes, the same for me when I left ASIO. I really missed the access. But just beyond that, I guess just that whole intel world. I mean, just that there is a world beyond the headlines of stuff happening through back channels and behind closed doors, and I just found it fascinating. And I mean, as an Australian citizen, I leave my service in government feeling very comfortable and confident. Yeah.
That that we as a democracy have good checks and balances in place, that there's good scrutiny of our intel services, but also there's just really good, impressive people there doing amazing, important work, much of which will never see the light of day. And so, I don't know, I feel like sometimes the intel world gets a bit of rough treatment and folks make bold assumptions and think that there's, I don't know, weird ass conspiracy theories going on or whatever. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I'd encourage people to put their hand up and get involved and see for themselves that these are hardworking, decent people doing important work, and ultimately, without realizing it, we have a lot to be thankful for.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk to you forever, but we'll start to wrap it up.
Yes, I think so.
I will say, though, if people want more from you, I found you on Twitter. Well, you found me. I think we found each other on Twitter. So you're on Twitter. So we will link you in with our Twitter page at iSpied Podcast.
At iSpied Podcast.
We just like saying that. And you also have International Intrigue. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Yeah.
International Intrigue is the one thing that lured me away from my dream career, the job I dreamed of having since I was a kid as an Australian diplomat. International Intrigue was founded by two of my good buddies from DFAT, and it is, to put very succinctly, it's a daily geopolitics newsletter, which is read by about 50,000 people.
Wow.
It's 50,001 now. That's something else I can read. Do you do it as an audio book? I'm a really lazy reader.
We do have a podcast which is called Intrigue Out Loud.
Great.
Read by 50,000 people. It was written by ex-diplomats like me, and it's free. So we are loving what we do.
Yeah, well, you should put it on Substack and make some money off that stuff.
Well, the idea is definitely to make money, but we're not charging people. I can talk to
you offline about how I think you could probably make some money.
Yeah, I can talk to you about how we do this every week and we don't make much money.
No, we don't make any money. No. We actually do it because, I don't know, why do we do it? I was going to say because we like each other.
Because our spouses won't talk to us about this stuff anymore.
Totally. Well, Jeremy, it was an absolute pleasure. Really appreciate you jumping on. It's just great to kind of have, as you said, behind the veil, a little peek behind the veil of, a job that I don't think a lot of people really understand.
Yeah. And it's an amazing job. I feel lucky to have done a day of it. And honestly, any folks listening who are thinking about a new career or a career change, I would totally suggest think about going into our foreign service. We need more good people than ever.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, have you been watching The Diplomat on Netflix?
Based on Twitter, I suspect I might be the one ex-diplomat in the world who has not watched a single episode.
I actually really, really liked it, but then what do I know?
Yeah, what do you know?
I've heard good things from people I trust, so yeah.
Oh, okay. Sure. Well, there you go. That's good.
Well, excellent. Thank you again, Jeremy, for joining us.
Thank you.
And
Pleasure.
Enjoy your socks in Noosa.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, it was just so great having Jeremy on.
Well, one of the things that now I never brought up, and I've got to bring it up right now, he leaves the diplomatic service and suddenly the diplomatic service is in disarray. I mean, the guy's talented.
Join the dots.
Very smart man. Good to have him on.
So good to have him on. It was just good to have someone discuss kind of like a portion of Australian government that I don't understand.
It was also nice to talk to somebody who didn't object being bagged and left in a box for a week.
Yeah, we need more of those.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my wife's not happy with me at all right now.
Do you want to unbag her?
Oh, I can do that.
Yeah.
Oh,